Guys, I want to thank Guy McPherson for coming on the show. I really do appreciate him coming on and giving his intellect, his acumen, his message. Even though it's somewhat of a difficult pill to swallow, it is getting closer and closer to what the UN is saying, or for that matter, even the Trump administration's own report. What I would say is this. Pessimism is not a survival trait. And I am not in this camp that leads itself to defeatism. And I'm not saying that's where he is. I'm just saying it can give that impression based on what's being said. I am in this camp that believe that human acumen, human skill, human intellect can be brought to bear upon a particular issue. Even an issue as drastic and as earth-shattering as something like this, where we're talking about the species being on the chopping block. Thanos, with the glove, had the ability to do all sorts of stuff, and the only thing he can come up with was killing the universe. To some degree, this boils down to, what do we, as a civilization, what can we bring to bear from the standpoint of our technological skill, our acumen, upon this issue? And is that enough? It's not saying that there's a magical door, but is it enough? I say maybe. And I say, in saying maybe, that the perspective here should not be one of defeatism. When I was, there was a time where I was in the hospital and I was bleeding profusely in my stomach, where it was like every 30, 40 minutes, like clockwork, blood would accumulate, and it would get to the point where when my stomach couldn't tolerate it anymore, it would come up. And this took place all night. Like, this went on for hours, like 8 or 9 hours. And I remember laying there one morning. It's like, oh man, I just want this to end. I just want this. Like, it was brutally painful and uncomfortable. And as my eyes are closing and as I'm like, God, I just want this to end. And not God in the sense of Jesus, but just like the way, the words. And I remember a little whisper in my head saying no. I don't know whether it was out of fear, self-preservation, or what, but this little whisper, this little aspect of self, I consider it the Aries moon in my chart. Resistance. Real, strident, unmitigated, lonely, whispering in the dark, no. I tend to look at the world in these ways, and even for something like the climate change issue, I look at it in the same terms. There's a poem that I absolutely love. The thing goes off in my head every time I read this poem and when I think about this poem. And after going through, you could say, this confrontation of reality with Guy McPherson. And look, Guy McPherson is just a guy. He's a person. And as a person, he doesn't necessarily have God's perspective of events, in which case he could be wrong. The UN report, this hair on fire report that these guys wrote, I don't necessarily think they're wrong, but I also don't necessarily think I'm in this camp that there's nothing that can be done. The problem that confronts us is one of culture. Before we can get to the point of applying human intellect upon a particular issue like this, we have to, at the very least, acknowledge that it's a problem in the first place. Those of us who look at this stuff, I don't want us to get into this idea of defeatism or this idea that nothing can be done, ergo, nothing should be done. I want you to rage against tonight. I'm going to say this poem because I love this poem. And like I said, I get a kick out of it every time I hear it. This poem was written by Jamarl Thomas. It's called Do Not Go Silently in That Good Night. It was a Welsh poet. It was published in the journal Boget Oscure in 1951, but it was written in 1947 when Thomas was in Florence. I'm going to do my best. I hope I do it justice. And I'm going to rock on some images at the same time. Do not go silently into that good night. Do not go silently into that good night. Old age should rage. Starts again. I'm sorry. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying light. The wise men at their end, no dark is right. Because their words had forked, no lightning they. Do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright. Their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay. Rage, rage against the dying light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late. They grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors, be gay. Rage, rage against the dying light. And you, my father, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying light. God, I love that poem. Love that poem. I'm not in this camp that believes in capitulation, even when it looks like it's an insurmountable task. I am not in this camp that believes in capitulation. Rage, rage against the dying light, even if you believe that it is indeed a dying light. I'm in this camp, and I know this sounds cheesy, the Star Trek camp. At the end of Star Trek, at a certain point, humanity got to the point where they realized that society, their world, their environment was crumbling around them, and that they were also going to take an L if they proceeded in the way that they typically go. And at that point, they came together, and as rational, for the first time, rational human beings started living within the means, within the context of their habitable space. And beyond that, started working with one another as equals, as human beings. And together they looked around and they said, whatever the problems that we had, whatever the balance, it's solved. We're done with the chaos. We're done with the havoc. We're done with the fighting with one another. We're rational human beings, and we are all human beings. We breathe the same breath, the same life that goes through me is in each and every one of them. We have more in common than we have separate. Whatever the balance between one another, it's even. And humanity started working towards this idea of abundance, working towards this idea of making sure that people had access to the things that they need. Because the fact is, until you reach the point where people have access to the things that they need, you will never get to the environmental issue. Meaning you can never even touch that issue until you get to the point of this person and that person having the basics of what they need to persist, where they can get to the point with you and saying, yes, let's look at the things that affect us in a larger context. Rage against the dying light. Firmly believe it. Pessimism is not a survival trait. And there's no point in starting now. I end this here. I don't want this one to go long. But I love that poem. I've loved that poem since I heard it several years ago. Jeff Kuntz sent it to me as a reminder for something. I forget what we were talking about. It feels appropriate, especially after McPherson. As McPherson was saying it, the only thing in my head was rage against the dying light. Even if it's in, you function as if it's not, because there's nothing else to do. You rage, you bitch, you moan, you push, you holler, you yell. You fight with every fiber of your being. You bite, you claw through that darkness with this idea that there is a potential, there is a chance, even if it's a one brimming glimmer of hope, that you could salvage that particular situation. We are talking about the existence of humanity itself. Is it not worth the fight? No, you cannot save yourself within the context of a capitalistic system. That system places profit above all else, including life on this planet. But the fact of the matter is that profit is not real. The system itself is not real. This game space that we've created for ourselves, in which we play and bump around and allow many of our fellow brethren to remain in poverty, remain not having access to the things that they need. That system needs to be abolished. And the fact is, there is no way you can maintain that system and also persist in life on this planet. There is going to be a price to pay. There is no magical door. There is a radical re-evolution of what it means to be humanity, either from the world and the environment itself taking a certain karmic justice, if you want to look at it that way, forcing itself upon humanity. Or humanity making the choice itself. Rational human beings making rational choices, looking after each other, and also looking after each other in the context of the habitable space to which we dwell. This is the only planet we got. And we are our brethren. We are all we have. We should be kind to one another. I'm not in the camp that believe this is impossible to fix. But it does take, at the very least, a cultural shift to look at this and acknowledge it as an issue. It would be easier if there was an asteroid that was about to hit the planet, where the focus of all of Earth could be focused on that asteroid, where we could say, oh my God, there's an asteroid. And all of our technical acumen would be placed with this idea of fixing that. The idea that you would put a price tag on stopping the end of the world will be nonsensical. And yet, that's what we talk about when we're talking about climate. The difference is we can't see it as an asteroid, and there's a lot of people on the planet who don't even acknowledge it as an issue in the first place. Rage against the dying light. It's not impossible. It's just difficult to do. At least that's my perspective of it. I'll leave it here. Thanks all.